everybody. Welcome to the Minimalist Podcast, where we discuss what it means to live a meaningful life with less. My name is Joshua Fields-Milburn.
And I'm Ryan Nicodemus, and together we are the Minimalists.
We've got Malabama here.
Hi, everybody.
TK Coleman.
It's a beautiful day.
It is indeed. The rest of our team is here in the studio as well. Coming up today on this free public minimal episode, we're talking to a listener about psychological clutter. And we've got a very special guest to help us tackle this question. Then we've got our lightning round segment, a live stream question, and a listener tip for you. You can check out the full 2-hour maximal edition of episode 393, where we answer 5 times the questions and we dive deep into several simple living segments. That private podcast episode is out right now at patreon.com/theminimalists. Your support keeps our podcast and YouTube channel 100% advertisement free because advertisements suck. Let's start with our callers. If you have a question or a comment for our show, give us a call, 406-219-7839, or email a voice recording to podcast@theminimalists.com. Our first question today is from Jess.
Hi, my name is Jess and I'm from Sydney, Australia. What do you think is the anatomy of hope? Could it be an idealist trigger for accumulating psychological clutter? Or is psychological clutter perhaps caused by our ego's response to hope, not actually hope itself? I tend to believe that hope is born out of the ego's response to rules and exceptions. And so when we look at a situation that is very unlikely to happen, there is an initial unconscious impulse to logicize and call in the statistics. We seem to have this desire to seek out and become aware of how many of our peers have attempted to do this before us and failed, and we grow increasingly convinced of the circumstantial resources, these unforeseen forces of luck and chance that always seem to be this uncontrollable part of the process in making something happen. So we read the failure stories and our mind implores us to stop there, being that our subconscious mind considers comfort and what is known as synonymous with safety and assurance. At a certain point, it seems that the risk has surpassed its worth. The safety is exceedingly compromised as the unconscious would perceive it, and we become all too aware that if one can fail, the next one can too, and that can be us. I think becoming aware of how many have held a similar dream and lost it along the way is probably one of the most devastating causes behind the buildup of emotional and psychological clutter. It is often a case of, why was I so foolish? Why did I hope so much for something different? Versus, why was I so fearful? Why didn't I have enough hope? Interestingly, in the book The Art of Thinking Clearly, Rolf Dobelli talks about something called survivorship bias, where he says that in daily life, because triumph is made more visible than failure, we systematically overestimate our chances of succeeding. Although I understand this as a concept, I think it completely overlooks the role that hope plays in these experiences. So I'd love to get your thoughts on where you find hope in the midst of psychological clutter, and how do you balance hope and pragmatism in a world where they're often pitted against each other?
Joining us in the studio to help us answer this question and many other questions on the private podcast is our good friend, Dr. John Deloney. Ladies and gentlemen, John Deloney.
If I had a pair of panties, I'd throw them at you, Deloney.
Man. You can take your hand off my leg under the table.
My hands are above the table. Video proves it.
Dr. J.
So, John, I want to talk to you about this because I think Ryan, TK, and I all have a sort of different understanding of hope. And I want to kill a sacred cow here.
Kill it.
I think what happens quite often is there are 2 types of hope. There's one kind of hope that is really just an expectation that's dressed up in a tuxedo. Mm-hmm. Oh, I really hope I win this championship. I really hope this person gives me their phone number. I really hope I win this game. I really hope I make this amount of money. I really hope I get this promotion. I hope I get the things, the material possessions that make me happy. I hope I get the status. I hope I get the friends. I hope I get the career. Whatever it is, these are just expectations, right? Mm. And we think as though they're going to complete us or make us more full, more satisfied, fulfilled. But the opposite often happens. And so I think there's a bit of psychological clutter here that is often created by that kind of hope. Now, there's another kind of hope. Desmond Tutu, I wrote this down. He said, hope is being able to see that there is light despite all the darkness. Now, that kind of hope is like an optimism, a hopefulness, right? And so when people hear me talk about hope and say, maybe it's not as virtuous as we always hold it up in this light, as though it's always good, it's always helpful, it is always this beacon of light. Maybe sometimes it is when you see that there is a lot of darkness and yet there is some light there. However, sometimes hope creates this psychological clutter. When we have so many hopes, as Jess illuminates here, all of a sudden we have this, there's a psychological clutter that sort of exists at the intersection of mental clutter and emotional clutter. And on your show, the John Deloney Show, which we'll link to in the show notes, you talk to a lot of people about anxiety. And I think a lot of our anxieties actually have to do with these expectations that we're renaming hope.
I consider there to be a stark difference between a wish and hope. And wish is, that's what you were talking about earlier with expectations. Mm-hmm. And they're ungrounded, they're unfounded. There's no, everything's attached to it, right? Mm-hmm. Versus, I like the idea of hope, as Desmond says, it's a path forward, right? Mm-hmm. We're heading towards a thing. And yeah, those are radically different constructs. Because when you have a path, there's usually some confidence. You've been with somebody, or you have taken steps towards a thing, versus I'm just sitting here hoping to be fulfilled externally, right?
Yeah. Well, that's another quote that I had written down from Arthur Miller. I think it's a mistake to ever look for hope outside of oneself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hope is, it's almost like hope based off of impulse becomes a wish. I mean, I guess certainly there are impulsive hopes that might be something that gives you that light. But yeah, it seems like the hope that you're talking about is based off of this impulsive desire. We want something right now. Yeah. Interesting. This is the first time I've heard you talk about hope, and I wasn't like, oh, I got to throw something in there. I really like how you described it.
So do you not like hope?
It's not, I don't like or dislike. I think of it like material possessions. People often think like Ryan, TK, and I are against material possessions.
Right.
And then so when I start to talk about hope, one might intuit from that I dislike hope. No, I think hope can be really useful for someone. Being hopeful, being optimistic, not blindly optimistic though, not blindly hopeful, but quite often, just like our material possessions can get in the way of our space, and they can also create mental and emotional clutter. I think hope can often do the same thing. Hoping for all of these externalities to happen, it's a type of consumerism. Consumerism is saying, hey, if I get that thing, it's going to make me happy or make me complete. Well, the same thing is true with hope. In fact, isn't that a type of hope in a way? It is a wish, as you call it. And we often use these terms synonymously, right? And so when I say wish or I say hope, we often mean the same thing. I hope I get that, which is fine. But if I'm going to make myself miserable until I get it, well, that's psychological clutter.
Yeah. And it can become a numbing device, right? And it can be a way of pausing your day by sitting there and just wishing I had and wishing I had and wishing I had. What I want us to guard against is Amos Tversky, a famous psychologist, says, and I'll butcher the quote up, but he said, being pessimistic is a waste of time, because if it comes true, it's happened twice. Once when you imagined it and meditated on it, and once when it actually happened. So why not spend your energy hoping for, why not spend your energy pouring into the best possible outcome and heading that way? And I think when you, again, for me, it's about momentum and it's about movement instead of just sitting there trying to accumulate, right? Yeah. One of those becomes an anchor.
Yeah. I mean, it's a tool, right? That's what hope is. And we have to be careful how we use it.
Yeah.
It's similar to faith. If we think about faith as the willingness to bet on something or someone, or as the willingness to act in accordance with what we say we believe, it's like, is faith good or bad? Well, it kind of depends. Who or what are you placing your faith in? Who or what are you trusting in? And there are some people you can trust, some processes you can trust that will really damage you and hurt you. That doesn't mean trust is bad. It just means we can't hide behind these concepts. We can't hide behind advice and say, oh, I found a neat little concept. I found a cool little word, a cool little maxim, and I don't have to think critically anymore. I can just sort of hide behind that. No, trust, hope, faith, love, all these things can destroy you if you channel those energies in the wrong direction, or if you have as the object of your hope or your faith something that is not worthy of it. But all of these things can be tremendously life-giving as well, depending on how you direct those energies or in whom you place that trust. Yeah. That's the anatomy of hope, I guess.
Podcast over. Great job, TK.
So I guess going back to her question, what is the anatomy of hope? Like if you look at it geometrically, what does that look like?
Yeah.
It depends on what kind of hope you're talking about, right? If you're talking about the freedom that you experience, to me, it doesn't require hope. And that's when someone asks a question like this, it almost presupposes that one must have hope in order to fill in the blank, succeed, be happy, whatever it might be. But I can tell you, many of the things that I've accomplished throughout my life, all of my so-called most impressive accomplishments are never things that I hoped would happen. They were a byproduct of doing something that didn't actually require hope. When I write every day, I sit down in the chair, put words on the page. There's not a outcome necessarily in mind, right? And even if there is an outcome in mind, an arrival point, I don't have to hope that I get there. When I drove from Ojai down to LA, I don't hope that I make it there. I just simply drive, and hope isn't part of that process at all for me. But I am hopeful as I do it.
Right.
And I think that's the distinction I like to make. If I have to inject hope, it's sort of the opposite of what you were saying, right? Like, yes, being pessimistic, I'm not pessimistic at all. In fact, I'm often accused of being overly optimistic. But yes, I think with hope, it's the same thing. Being hopeful right now is not required for me to get to my destination.
That's interesting because no one would look at someone who's like has hope all the time and be like, that's a really hopeful person. It almost sounds like an insult or like you would feel sorry for that person. Like,
oh, interesting.
Yeah. But you would look at someone and be like, that's a really optimistic person.
Yeah. So there was a monk that I credit with really being important, saving my life a decade ago. And he was a bioethics professor. And then at the end of the semester, he'd head off to the monastery and be gone until school started again. And I remember one day we were having lunch and he told me, John, pessimism and sarcasm are the wisdom of this age, and they so often present as wisdom. And joy and hope and optimism so often present as nonsense, as the idiot, right? And he said, never forget that those are that's just an ethos. And you can, over time, change your default setting to one of optimism, one of okay, here's all the challenges, let's go get it, versus here's all the challenges, let's shut it down. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's getting back to the Desmond Tutu quote, like if there are a bunch of challenges there, that's where hope is a useful tool, right? It's saying, yes, I know I can get to the other side of these challenges that are in front of me, or someone who is in tremendous debt or having mental health issues, as we'll talk about later today. No matter where you are, if you have challenges in front of you, maybe it is that kernel of hope that allows you to realize like, oh, this is something I can either get through, get around, bypass, or let go of altogether.
And it's not using hope as Xanax. It's just sitting there, not willing to do anything and engage and just say, I hope.
Yeah.
And I think it's also important to note, sometimes those in our community are the light switch, right? I can spend time with you and I can see hope that, oh, I can do better when it comes to this stuff. Or I can spend time with Ryan and think, I don't want my marriage to look anything like, I'm just kidding. But you can be around other people and they are hope because they are the path. You can see them and go, okay, that's an example of what this looks like for me.
Yeah. They're shining the light for you, which gives you that intrinsic sense of hope. You're not relying on them for hope. You're witnessing them.
I have a picture of it now. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, speaking of hope and tying that into anxiety really quickly, you talked to me privately off mic, but I'm going to drag it here on mic. So you just finished writing a new book that comes out in October. It's called, what's it called?
Building a Non-Anxious Life.
Okay. And going through this, you also realized you had to go rent a hotel room to finish the book. And then when you got home, you said, oh, wait, there's a lot of anxiety in my own life and it has a lot to do with my material possessions.
Yeah. So I started with a couple of premises. One is And again, I'm considering myself a mental health professional. That's what I do. And that's my community. And more people than ever before are medicated. More people than ever before are under the care of a professional. And the depression and anxiety rates continue to skyrocket. And I remember thinking when they discovered penicillin, death from infection fell off a map, right? And so what we're doing might be an adjunct, might be helping, but we're not solving this problem. We got to look at some of these things at a deeper level. So that's where I started with the premise. And I went down a rabbit hole to try to figure this out. And as we were talking last night, I couldn't deny the literature and just my own life about anxiety and stuff, and having bodies designed for scarcity, suddenly surrounded by all this junk. And even if it's quote unquote good junk, and I can't breathe.
Yeah.
And I was surrounded by all this debt and all of this hurt that we're absorbing through the news all the time. We're just not designed for it.
Yeah.
And what I found myself, which is unique for me, because I consider myself a problem solver and I didn't have a map out. And I remember leaving my family. I've got 2 young kids and my wife, and we live out in the woods. And I went and checked into a hotel for a week and said, I got to write my way out of this. I didn't know what to do. In fact, I even thought about calling you guys, being like, hey, man, I need some help here. But I didn't have a path out. And I thought I was out of the matrix, and I realized, oh no, I was just in a different version of the matrix. And the only way to unplug from this thing is to get completely out.
Yeah, it's fascinating because what we often think we should get, the object of our desire, quickly becomes the object of our misery. And we start to feel hopeless when we get all of the things and it didn't do what we thought it would do.
And you just spin faster.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny because we do a home tour every week on Patreon for our video podcast subscribers. And a few weeks ago, I posted a photo of where I live. And I was literally walking through the house, snapped a photo real quick because I knew I needed to post something up on Patreon. And it's aggressively simple, but I didn't like tidy up or anything. It's rather brutalist. It's stark, right? I'm not prescribing that to anyone. But I remember the first comment was, yeah, like anyone lives like that. I was like, well, wait a minute. But that's exactly how I live.
Right.
They're like, where are you hiding all of your stuff? I'm like, I got rid of it. And my actual response was, if it was on social media, I would just ignore it. But it was one of our patrons. And my response was, you don't have to hide your stuff if you get it out of the way.
Right.
I don't think the stuff is bad or wrong or evil, but if it's creating this underlying anxiety, ultimately what happens is that anxiety, just like if you were to hear sirens going by constantly, that's going to create anxiety within you. Loud noises, visual clutter creates this internal clutter in our lives. And what was the best way for me to get on the other side of that was to subtract anything that was actually covering up the path for me.
So, and I didn't write about this. This is the first time I've talked about this publicly. My wife, one day I was down in the gym. This is over Christmas, and we have a little gym in our basement, and I'm exercising down there, and she heard me cheering. And I'd gotten a text message, this was over a holiday break, that I'd landed a speaking gig that I really wanted. And the guy who runs all that for me, he had texted in and said, hey, and I think we got you another one. And I was cheering. So she comes down and says, what are you so excited about? And I was like, I got this. And then I got this. And as she retells this, she said, I literally was watching my husband die in front of me. And then I hear him cheering that he got more work. And her normal, she withdraws, right? So when she gets upset or gets anxious, her normal move is to just pull back and then we reconvene. And this time she didn't, and she stepped forward in a way that kind of caught me off guard. And I'll never forget this as long as I live, because it was unmooring. She said, the pie chart that is how much I love you and the pie piece that is how much money you make is full. Anything that you go get beyond this is not for me and it's not for the kids, it's for your ego. And she said, so from this point forward, go do whatever you want to do, but do not make the mistake of thinking it's for us. And then she said this, John, we have enough. And then she walked out. And I remember thinking, I don't have a psychology for the word enough. I didn't know where to go. And I took the jobs. I took both of them because I didn't have another path. And now I'm on this, like I'm literally in real time. What does enough mean? What does enough mean? Because I got one set of part of my brain being screamed at. If you don't have this, literally the world's coming down. Money's going to go away. The economy, democracy's running aground. So you got this. And on the other side, I've got a body designed for scarcity. It's like, I can't handle it. And it's like my body declared civil war on itself. And it's what is enough? What is enough? Right.
Before we even unpack the enough part, I just got to shine a spotlight on this and say, ladies and gentlemen, this is what greatness looks like.
Yes.
This is what greatness looks like. This is why you're great at what you do.
Amen.
I think about that infamous moment where in the middle of a game, Jordan does a move on Kobe. And when there's kind of like a break in play, Kobe goes up to Mike, gets next to him and says, how did you do that? And I thought that's what greatness looks like, because he's not saving face in this moment. He's being a humble student of the game and saying, hey, I don't really know something. Can I just put off the competitive mask for a second and have you teach me? And what you're doing, I always say that a teacher is just a lead learner. They are there to model for their students what it looks like to learn. And I think being a mental health practitioner, you got to be your first client in order to be good at helping other people, and to see you process in real time, to see you wrestle with your own vulnerabilities, and to say, look, I don't always have to look like I know the answer to everything. That's why you're so freaking great, man, at giving people perspective. This right here.
Don't make
this
his
is your
head any
magic.
bigger. Come on.
This is this magic.
It's a huge head.
Well, yeah, I mean, in that same vein, I want to point out like how you're modeling a good relationship, man. The fact that like you and your wife can have interactions like that and become stronger from it, and there's not like a defense that comes up, and you really consider what she's saying. It's the same thing like when my wife comes to me and says something, a boundary that I've crossed or that she hasn't expressed. The old Ryan Nicodemus, my first reaction would have been like, oh, well, this is why you shouldn't have that boundary. Here's why you shouldn't feel that way. And now it's very much like, yeah, like I know that this woman loves me. I know that we're good for each other. It's like if Josh came to me and said something, it's like, I know that Josh isn't coming at me with something that is an insult or, he's just, out of his mind. It's more about like, hey, here's something I've observed that might help you. And I think in romantic relationships, it's harder to take it sometimes to take advice like that sometimes. So yeah, awesome. Like modeling an amazing relationship too. I don't know how your wife puts up with you, but that's awesome, man.
She's pretty incredible, man. She's pretty incredible.
When you got off the elevator today, we went to a dinner together last night. I don't know how many people were there, 70, 80, 100 people. And we're there. And then you got off the elevator this morning. You said, when did you leave last night? I don't know if you remember what I said, but I said when I had enough.
Yeah.
And when I had enough was like, what is enough for me is different for Ryan and TK. Were still there because they hadn't had enough for them yet, right?
Enough wine. I still needed like 2 more glasses of wine.
Yeah, dude. When they brought the disco ball out, TK was the first one on the floor, man.
Well, my problem used to be that everyone else is enough. I then prescribed that to me. Oh yeah. Everyone else is working these many hours, or they're aspiring to be a C-level executive. That must be enough for me because it's enough for that person. Not even knowing whether or not it actually is enough for them. They haven't stopped to ask that question, what is enough either, right? But also, I didn't stop to ask that question. What is enough money? What is enough time? What is enough accomplishments? What is enough Twitter followers? What is enough friendships? What is enough in my life? And when I didn't ask that question, more was always the answer.
Always. That's our culture's default narrative, which is more. Add. And I guess there's a humbling part that I can't believe I've made it this far in my life, and without stopping to spend a considerable amount of time, both personally, spiritually, psychologically with my wife. What is enough? Because if you don't, man, that machine the arrow on the treadmill just keeps getting pushed and pushed and pushed. And in this world that we're at, the answer is never. Yeah. There's never enough. There's always somebody that wants a piece. And I can't believe I spent this much time trying to talk about mental health and without pondering that question very deeply.
Yeah. Some of that is not so much a shortcoming in you. Some of that is just evidence of a great marriage playing the role that it's designed to play.
Correct.
It's a mirror of accountability, right? Because we have our own narratives where sometimes our concept of enough is based on the assumptions about what other people expect of us. It's kind of like in Breaking Bad, where he's made all these sacrifices, kind of ruined his life, looks at his wife and says, I did it all for you. And she says, I never asked you for any of this. And it's like, light bulb on. You mean I was living out this narrative based on what I assume you expected of me?
Yeah.
Thank you for that gift, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes we do that. And I think what a wonderful gift your wife gave you when she says, we have enough. And it sets you free from any story you can tell yourself about, well, my wife wants this, my wife needs that, my family needs that. Like, no, man, she just gave you a really amazing gift. And so when we have those moments, we can say, why didn't I know that earlier? Or it's like, thank God I know it now.
Thank God I know it now.
Yeah.
And that freedom can be untethering, right?
Yeah.
When someone just cuts that balloon string, man, there's some floating around that happens before you kind of reground. But it's good.
It's difficult when it keeps falling in your lap too, man. Like when you have enough, but people are trying to give you more work in this case. I mean, yeah, of course the default mode is, I better take this job. Because, writers and like what we do, there is no salary. It's like, you kind of got to take which you can get while you can get it. And yeah, it's difficult to turn that stuff down. So let's get practical real quick before we wrap this up. You said you're feeling stressed out about your stuff. Specifically, that's what you were saying off camera about how...
So I sat down in my basement. I've got a little writing room down there, and I got all my guitars on the wall, and there's several, which is insane.
How many of those do you play at once?
Twice a year, exactly. And I've got books. I'm a former academic. My wife was Dr. Deloney long before I was, and so we've got books everywhere. And it was funny. I started pulling them apart, and I literally channeled you too. I was like, "How would we do this?" And guys, I hung my head in shame because I was like, an educated mental health guy has to have these on this shelf. And I will read these. And then there was like, no, you won't. You've got 10 more in the Amazon box on the front porch. And it was this, my identity is just woven through this library. And that was I need to sit down and get some, I'm entered into a space that I'm tempted to call a character issue. I don't think it's that. I need some skills. I need a set of skills. I need a roadmap to follow here, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of a bunch of junk and then I'm going to buy it all back because I won't have dealt with the issue.
I think that's ultimately what happens quite often. That's why you don't hear the minimalists do, here are the 67 ways to declutter your bookshelf. Because I can show you how to get rid of all your books. In fact, I can go in your house and steal all your books, and now you're bookless, but you just reclutter the space. I used to own 2,000 books, some of which I'd actually read. Most of which I hadn't, but I held on to them because they made me look really smart when people came over. Look at all these books that he hopes to read someday, right? And so that type of hope was actually getting in the way for me, because it was like my identity gets so tied up in these things. So a few rules, boundaries, we really call them, that we set up a few years ago. We have this free ebook that people who listen to this, they can download. It's called The Minimalist Rule Book, 16 Rules for Living with Less. It's just at theminimalists.com. Just click on our resources page there. A bunch of free resources you can download, including the Minimalist Rule Book. But a couple that I really find useful in a scenario like this is the spontaneous combustion rule. You can pull out any item. So you look at all of your books at once as one item for a second. If they all spontaneously combusted, would you replace all of them? And if the answer to that is no, then okay, that's a sign. But if the answer is yes, that's okay. That means, okay, I'm going to get some sort of value from them, hypothetically, right? Or would I feel a sense of relief if they spontaneously combusted?
I'd feel so good, man.
Right? And that is the sign. If I would feel good, then it's obviously clutter, not just physical clutter, but it's that mental, emotional, psychological clutter that we've been talking about. The other one, we hold on to a lot of books. Why? Just in case. 3 most dangerous words in the English language. And because it allows us to justify holding on to anything, holding on to toxic relationships, holding on to a career that is not fulfilling us, and holding on to the stuff and the status and the identity that we're holding on to. And so what Ryan and I came up with over a decade ago was the just in case rule. Anything that I'm holding on to physical, I can let go of it if I'm holding on to it just in case, because I can replace it for less than $20 in less than 20 minutes from wherever I am. Now, at first, it's like, that's an incredible rule of privilege. You have to spend $20 every single time No, you never have to use it.
Right.
Things you're holding on to just in case you never end up using.
You never use, right.
And it allows you to get rid of tens of thousands of just in case items that are causing it, clogging up. They're creating all of that internal clutter. Starting with the physical clutter.
Yeah. Real quick, like when it comes to your stuff stressing you out, are you stressed out because you're thinking about how Josh and I would judge you if we were over in your study, or like what's stressing you out about it?
And guys, I just lost his name. He's a Japanese minimalist. Just lost his name. Dawn Madsen, who's goes by the Minimal Mom. She put me onto him, and he had this conversation where he says, every inanimate object in your house is having a conversation with you, whether you know it or not.
Ooh.
And at first I was like, okay, that sounds all hokey.
Yeah.
And then I realized my guitars are always saying, oh, are you just done playing music? Is that who you are now? Or my books are like, are you going to be stupid forever? And I've got clothes in my closet. They're like,
wow.
Remember when you used to exercise and you were actually in shape? Are you just going to be fat dad now? Is that where we're headed? Ooh. And then I've got other clothes, like everything the dishes in the sink are like, oh, you're going to be that husband that just hates his wife? You're going to be that guy?
In a weird way, you're hoarding hope.
It never, but it's this, it was this light bulb that came on. I'm having 10,000 conversations at the same time. The woodworking stuff is like, oh, you're never going to build that treehouse for your son, are you? And he's going to go to college and you're going to, sure, son, we'll get to it. Cat's in the cradle. It never stops. And so it's really almost pathologically, almost like Sybil. I'm trying to shut the voices up.
Yeah.
And at some point, I can't compete. I've got to hand some of this stuff out, right? Because it won't stop.
And if it were to spontaneously combust,
it would be
all of a
peace.
sudden,
The voices stop.
Yes, the voices stop as well. Yeah. Ryan, what time is it?
You know what time it is? It's time for the lightning round where we answer your questions from TikTok.
Yes, indeed. You can follow The Minimalists on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and Elon's Twitter at The Minimalists. Are we still on there? I know we're not verified anymore.
I don't know. There's something about not having the blue check that I love.
Do you feel less important or more important, or just the same?
I feel like I'm opting out of the game, which is nice.
The validation is not external, it is internal.
Although I hear if you have a blue check, you can edit your tweets.
And you get no ads or fewer ads, which is the compelling reason to me.
And I cannot tell you how many times I've tweeted something and then Josh responds to it and is like, hey, you misspelled this.
Or how about we both stay employed? Take that down.
Yeah.
I don't care about that. We don't have any advertisers.
Right, exactly. We can't be canceled.
Who's going to cancel it? Me?
You can't cancel us. We're canceling us.
All right. During the lightning round, this is where we each have 60 seconds to answer your question with a short, shareable, less than 140 character response. We call them minimal maxims. We put these minimal maxims in the show notes over at theminimalists.com/podcast so you can copy and share our pithy answers on social media. We'll let John go last so he can think about his pithy answer. But we have a question here from Yashvi.
Aren't you always going to have to compromise something in a relationship for love? If that's the case, wouldn't everyone be single forever?
Ooh, let's talk about this. So compromise, before we put any time on the clock for Ryan here, it seems to me that there are different types of compromise when we refer to compromise, right? Mm-hmm. So let's give Ryan some time. Let him unpack this for us.
All right. My pithy answer is this. Love inspires the desire to support, not sacrifice. So when I read this question, I thought about my wife and I and how I love going out of my way for her. She had a women's retreat that she went and did. She had an amazing time. She was finished on Sunday night. I had a flight on Monday morning. So she didn't think I was going to be there for her, and she was totally okay with that. But I saw it as an opportunity. Like, I know I'm going to lose sleep tonight, but I'm going to go up there and show her the support that I know that she's really going to appreciate. And to me, that wasn't a compromise. It wasn't a sacrifice. It was an opportunity for me to go up there and really show how much I love her. But set that aside. Set aside these relationships. I think about the other day, I was on the 405 and it was my time's about up. I'm just going to stop right there unless I can get an additional 60 seconds.
All right, let's give him another 60 seconds.
All right, so I'm on the 405 the other day. And it's not rush hour. It would have been better if it was rush hour because at least traffic moves slowly. It was like lunch rush hour. So a lot of vehicles, but going
sporadic.
Yeah, going very, very fast. And as I'm driving down the highway, I see this kitten in the middle of the road. And I'm like, oh my God, this kitten has like gotten hit. And I start to get sad. And as I drive by it, I see it turn its head and, you can tell it's like meowing. And my heart just like melted. I'm like, oh man, like I have to do something for this kitten. So I like pulled over. And it was a perfect little spot. There was an on-ramp. There's a little median. I get out of my car. I'm like waving like a madman, like, stopping people. I think, Jordan, you got a picture of this. You can put it up if you want. But waving like a madman, cars stop. And just everything that I compromised in that situation with like my safety, not just with the cars, but diseases from this cat, like nothing was going to stop me from like helping this cat out. And, I saved it. I'm a hero. What can I say?
TK, you got something pithy for me.
Yes, relationships involve compromise, but compromise doesn't require condescension. So I give you my 3 C's of compromise. 1, catering. 2, competing. 3, collaborating. Catering is when you say, well, you don't want what I want. We don't like the same things, but I'm going to cater to you by stooping to the level of your desire, and I'll try to be a saint about it. Let's do what you want to do. Competing is when you say, well, we're going to fight each other to get the other to bend to the will of the other. I want to do what I want to do. You want to do what you want to do, but I'm going to bend you in my direction. And now we're competing for who has the superior game plan. Collaborating is when you say, hey, it looks like my familiar habits don't resonate with your familiar habits. Why don't we work together to come up with some new third thing that we both can delight in? When you collaborate, compromise becomes an expression of co-creativity rather than some form of competition or catering. That's what makes a relationship life-giving. You can compromise without condescending.
Yes, indeed. I think I have a different sort of idea about compromise. What Ryan was talking about earlier is he was able to compromise his preferences for more sleep without compromising his values. And I think that's what's important. And I think that's what the question asker is conflating here. You don't have to compromise your values in order to love someone. Love does not require compromise. It does not require commitment. It does not require covenant. It requires awareness for the other person. To love someone is to see them for who they are without trying to force them to change, without manipulating them, without persuading them, without convincing them that I know better than you. I've got this video real quick I want to play from Anthony DeMello that I thought would fill us in here and better answer this question than I'm capable of doing.
Love is like listening to a symphony. Life is a symphony, and to love means to be sensitive to the whole of that symphony. It means to have a sensitive heart to everyone and to everything.
You don't have to compromise your values to have a sensitive heart to see someone else. Yes, if you're in a relationship with anyone, there are times where it's going to be uncomfortable. And it might be your preference to be filled with comfort all the time. You might have to compromise some of your preferences without compromising who you are as a person. John, any insights?
I think I may contradict all of y'all. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Please.
We insist.
Even better.
We insist.
When I choose love, I'm choosing to take a knee before this other person and say, I give you my all. And my hope is, as we talked about earlier, my hope is you will reciprocate that. But when I love, I don't have to. I get to. When I love, I'm saying, I am putting all I am before you, and you now come first. And when two people do that together in a romantic relationship and they both race to the bottom of how can I love you? How can I love you? How can I love you? then questions like that were asked, they become but a mist. Like they don't exist. There's no more like, well, I want to watch that movie. I want to watch the movie that's going to bring you the most joy. And like, if you're with Ryan, that's Fast and the Furious 7, and that's just what he's into.
He's more of a Tokyo Drift guy.
Hey, we're not friends, we're family.
We're family. That's right. But it's an ethos. And does it always work perfect? No. And there are times you end up at family vacations, of course. But I just think I think feelings, all that stuff is distant nonsense to I submit.
That was exactly 280 characters. We're good.
It's amazing. Well, when those feelings come up, like, if Mariah wanted to watch a movie and I'm like, I don't want to watch that movie. Why do we always got to watch what you like? That is, I mean, I know that's how you and your wife kind of
exactly
communicate.
How we are.
But it's a sign of something deeper. Like there is a deeper issue going on. If you're feeling resentment towards something like a movie preference, there's probably some underlying thing that you might want to dig into a little bit.
And I think it's important to call out what you mentioned about values. Because there's going to be those moments, I want our kid to go to this school. I want our kid to go to this school. And love, just taking a knee doesn't solve that issue, right? And so you got to go back to your values, the ones you all agreed on. And what you said, TK, you got to build something new because you're building it together, right?
Yeah.
We're going to check on with the Patreon live stream here in a moment. But first, real quick for right here, right now, here's one thing that's going on in the life of the Minimalists. This is exciting because we are 1 week away from our first ever decluttering course. We've been working on this since last year. It's called Simplify Everything. Hopefully we'll get Dr. John
Dude,
Deloney
I'm going to be your first person
to tweet about it.
Heck yeah, man.
Here's the fascinating thing about this. We have resisted doing some sort of course for a long time because we know how much work goes into it. I teach a writing class online, and I know precisely how much effort you have to put in to create something that's meaningful, that will bring immense value to people's lives. And so it's these 5 different areas of clutter. So it's 5 weeks long. And each week, we help declutter one form of clutter. It starts with the physical clutter because we're the minimalists and people often associate material possessions with clutter. There's so many other kinds of clutter that we unpack throughout the course. So the second week, we walk you through digital clutter, the glowing screens on your walls or in your pockets or in your bag. A lot of digital clutter in our lives. And then from there, we go to calendar clutter. Oh, I'm so busy. That's just another way to say my life is out of control. When I say I'm busy, I'm busy, I'm busy. Well, how do we get around that? We declutter the calendar clutter. And from there, we talk about financial clutter. We talk a lot about the baby steps and things like that.
You're like taking chapter 6 of my new book, man. Congratulations. Like literally, this is it right here, man.
But in the last one,
the imitation is the best form of flattering.
Wow, leaked copy somehow.
The last week we go through relationship clutter, the sort of toxic relationships we have in our lives, or just some of the relationships that we are holding on to because of convenience or proximity that we might need to let go of. And so it's 5 weeks long. It's 17 video lessons. Each video lesson, I think, has 14 different segments in it, 45 clutter problem areas, 135 decluttering solutions, a 30-page workbook, student forums, and much, much more of less.
I'm so proud of us, gentlemen. Like looking at the videos, we're going through the editing process right now, and we really have provided something amazing. And,
Ryan called me yesterday. He goes, I can't believe how great I was in these videos. I'm like, you stole the show. Week 1 especially, he was, just so on point. It was 57 points, game-winning shot. It was unbelievable. If you're interested, simplifyeverything.xyz is the website. Simplifyeverything.xyz. And this course opens for 72 hours only on May 29th. But to go to simplifyeverything.xyz right now, put your email address in there. We'll let you know as soon as the enrollment opens up. Alabama, let's check in with the Patreon live stream. What do you got for us?
I have a comment here from Violet. She says, I think the Japanese author Dr. John Deloney was talking about earlier is Fumio Sasaki, who wrote Goodbye Things.
That's
excellent book.
Yes, excellent.
Oh.
Yeah, Goodbye Things, which is a book that we quoted from in our last book, Love People Use Things. And because the idea is, it's not just about like renouncing the things. It's almost honoring the things by saying goodbye to them, recognizing that either you served a purpose. You added some sort of value, or maybe I thought you were going to, but you're no longer doing what I thought you would do. So goodbye.
Yeah.
We're going to check back in with the Patreon live stream here in a bit. But first, Alabama, what else you got for us?
Here's a minimalist insight from one of our listeners.
Hello, this is Bryce from Delray Beach, Florida. I wanted to share a tip that I came up with to live a more balanced and intentional life. What I did was I have a planner that instead of going by the hour, it goes by the different realms of health. And it made this really cool acronym that's easy to remember and easy to apply. And that's SPECIAL. Every day is special, and every day is an opportunity to grow spiritually, physically, emotionally, communally, intellectually, adaptively, and lucratively.
All right, y'all, that's our minimal episode for today. We'll see you on Patreon for the full 2-hour maximal edition of episode 393, which includes answers to a bunch more questions like, when is suicide? That is, letting go of one's own life. When is that appropriate? What does an uncluttered mind feel like? What tips would you give somebody who has trouble mentally clocking out of work? Plus a million more questions for Dr. John Deloney and the Minimalists. Also this week, a private minimalist home tour of one of our listeners' bedrooms, a beautiful bedroom with beautiful lighting. All that and much, much, much more of less. And if you want to check all of that out, check out the Minimalist private podcast at patreon.com/theminimalist or click the link in the description to subscribe and get your personal link so that our weekly Maximal episodes play in your favorite podcast app. You also get access to all of our podcast archives all the way back to episode 001. And if you're still on the fence, here's a testimonial from one of our lovely Patreon supporters. Tina says, I just want to share how the Minimalist Private Podcast has changed my life and why I continue to support you on Patreon. I found your podcast when I was in a dark place, and I've listened to almost every episode. Thanks to your private podcast, I have healed my relationship with stuff. My house is orderly, and I no longer desire to buy what my neighbors own. I don't even shop for clothes anymore. I already have everything I need. What I actually needed was more time to be creative and to connect with the people in my life, to love people and use things. Big thanks, Tina. That's a really thoughtful comment. Really grateful for the value that we are able to add. And also big thanks to Dr. John Deloney for joining us today. Check out his show. It's on YouTube. We'll put a link to it in the show notes. It's called The Dr. John Deloney Show. And if you leave here today with just one message, please, let it be this. Love people and use things. Because the opposite never works. Thanks for listening, y'all.
We'll see you next time.
Peace.
Every little thing you think that you need. Every little thing you think that you need. Every little thing that's just feeding your greed. Oh, I bet that you'd be fine without it.